Jack Reaper Sullivan's wooden cabin was nestled deep in the mountains of Montana. Inside, the warmth from the fireplace couldn't dispel the silence. Jack lay on his cot, his muscles taut beneath his thin t-shirt. He was facing his biggest enemy, memory. In his dream, Jack saw the blinding headlights from that year again. The sound of tires screeching on the frozen road echoed in his head. The car flipped over. He saw his daughter's small hand slowly go limp. Jack woke up with a start, his back drenched in sweat. He whispered to himself, "You couldn't save them, Jack. Go to sleep." A loud bang jolted the front door. Jack was instantly on his feet. The instincts of a Navy SEAL kicked in before his brain could process it. He reached for the Glock 19 resting on the wooden table, his thumb flicking off the safety. He moved low, approaching the door with practiced clearing technique. Jack didn't ask who was there. In this region, late-night visitors usually carried a gun or fangs. He yanked the doorknob open. Wind and snow rushed into the room. Jack squinted, looking down at the floor. The intruder couldn't stand steadily. It was a large German shepherd. Its black and gray fur was matted with snow and blood. Around its neck was a worn-out tactical K 9-unit leather collar. The dog was panting, its front legs trembling, but its fierce golden eyes were locked onto Jack. Behind it was a makeshift plastic sled, secured to the dog's shoulders with rope. Curled up on the sled was a little girl wrapped in a thin blanket. Jack lowered his gun. He saw the name tag on the dog's collar, Baron. "Damn it," Jack muttered. He grabbed Baron's collar, pulled the dog and the sled inside, and slammed the door shut. Jack carried the girl to the sofa. He checked the child's pulse and breathing. Her skin was blue, her breath shallow. Jack fetched dry blankets, wrapping Emily tightly. He avoided using hot water immediately, knowing it would cause thermal shock. "Warm her up slowly. You know the drill, Sullivan." Jack's voice was hoarse. Baron refused to lie down. The dog frantically clawed at Jack's boots. It ran to the door, barked loudly, then returned and gently tugged at his pant leg. Blood from its side wound dripped onto the wooden floor in dark red streaks. Jack knelt to examine the dog's injury. This was not a wound from impact. There were deep, sharp gashes. Jack recognized it immediately. Wolf bite marks. A large pack. The girl on the sofa began to stir. Emily opened her eyes, hazy from the cold shock. She saw Jack and trembled, gripping his sleeve. My grandma," Emily whispered hoarsely. The wolves surrounded the house. "Baron, pull me away. Grandma is still there." Jack looked at Emily, then at Baron. The dog stood tall, ears pricked up like a sentry awaiting orders. Inside Jack's mind, a military machine began to whir. He calculated distance and time. If the dog had pulled a child through a blizzard, their house couldn't be more than 3 miles away. At a wolf's pace, the grandmother wouldn't survive until morning. Jack stood up. He walked to his gear locker. The fear and emptiness within him temporarily vanished, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of a tactical specialist. He put on his snow camouflage jacket and tactical harness. He loaded spare magazines for the Glock and tucked his K-Bar combat knife into his belt. Jack checked the stove and placed a pot of warm water next to Emily. He knew she would be safe here for the next few hours. "Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but me," Jack instructed. He turned to Baron. The dog seemed to understand, waiting at the door, muscles tense despite its injury. Jack opened the door. The blizzard roared in again, but this time he didn't flinch. He looked at the dog and ordered using military jargon. "Baron, target acquisition. Lead the way." The dog dashed into the white night. Jack followed close behind, their figures quickly swallowed by the snow. A new mission had begun. This time, Jack wouldn't allow himself to be late. Jack moved like a ghost through the whiteout. The blizzard was no longer just a weather phenomenon. It had become a physical wall. The wind lashed his face. Snow froze on his eyelashes and beard. Every step was a struggle against gravity and the deep snow. Jack reached up to adjust his night vision goggles. Useless. The thick snowfall reflected the infrared light, creating a blinding white wall. He took the goggles off, stuffing them into his jacket pocket. Modern technology had surrendered to Mother Nature. Now, he reverted to his most primitive senses. He looked down at Baron. The dog walked 3 paces ahead. Its head was low, nose skimming the snow's surface. The wind was blowing the opposite way, carrying a scent that only this animal could analyze. Jack tied a length of parachute cord to his harness, the other end to Baron's collar. In this storm, if they lost each other by more than 2 meters, they would be lost forever. "Lead the way, old friend," Jack mumbled. His breath instantly turned into smoke as it left his mouth. They had covered about 2 miles. Jack's thighs were starting to burn from the continuous exertion in the deep snow. His lungs ached from the cold air, but his mind remained ice cold. He counted his breaths. He constantly scanned the flanks. The habit from his days in Afghanistan never faded. Suddenly, the parachute cord snapped taut. Baron stopped. Jack stopped instantly, too. He dropped to one knee, lowering his center of gravity. Baron didn't bark. The dog stood still as a stone statue, its hackles raised in a straight line down its spine. A low growl emanated from deep in its chest. It wasn't a normal warning growl. It was a hostile contact signal. Jack switched off the flashlight mounted on his shoulder. The darkness swallowed them. He squinted into the space. Ahead, the wind whistled through the pine branches, creating chaotic sounds. But Jack wasn't listening to the wind. He was listening for the change in the atmosphere. Then he saw them. Fierce yellow dots of light appeared, hovering in the snowy screen. 1 pair, 2 pairs, 5 pairs. They weren't stationary. The lights moved, spreading out and encircling them in a crescent. Formation. Jack felt a cold sweat run down his spine. Northern timber wolves. They were much larger than domestic dogs, and in this harsh winter, hunger turned them into fearless killing machines. They had smelled the fresh blood from Baron's side wound. "Safety off," Jack whispered, his thumb flipping the safety on the Glock 19. But he couldn't shoot yet. Visibility was too limited. Shooting randomly would reveal his exact position and incite a simultaneous attack. He needed to lure the pack leader out. A black shadow lunged from Jack's left blind spot. The alpha wolf. It didn't growl. It attacked in absolute silence. Its target was Jack's throat. Jack pivoted, raising his left arm to block. But he was a beat too slow. Whoosh. Another black shadow cut across his vision. Baron. The K-9 dog launched from the snow's surface. It collided with the alpha wolf midair. The two bodies met with a solid thud. Baron used its own weight to knock the enemy away from Jack. Baron and the alpha tumbled in the snow. The wolf was larger, but Baron was faster. The dog clamped down on the wolf's thick neck skin, shaking its head violently to tear the opponents. Muscles. The ambush was broken. The entire pack charged. Jack no longer had time for calculations. Another wolf, ash gray, lunged straight at his legs. Jack swung his right leg, kicking hard at its muzzle. The steel-toed combat boot connected with the animal's jawbone. The wolf flew backward. Jack drew his Glock. He aimed at a wolf attempting to sneak up on Baron from behind. Bang! The gun recoiled sharply in his hand. The wolf whimpered and lay still. The hot shell casing dropped onto the snow with a small hiss. But Jack couldn't shoot again. Baron and the alpha were wrestling, too close to each other. The two masses of black and gray fur were tangled in a confusing mess. A stray bullet could kill his only teammate right now. Jack holstered the gun. His right hand drew the K-bar knife. The 7-inch steel blade reflected the faint moonlight. Close quarters. Jack yelled, hyping himself up. He lunged into the fight. Another wolf split from the pack, leaping onto Jack's chest. He didn't dodge. He brought up his thickly jacketed left arm to defend. The animal's teeth sank into the Kevlar-lined fabric and the flesh beneath. Pain shot through his arm, but Jack didn't cry out. He tensed his muscles, holding the wolf tight. His right hand swung up. The K-bar blade plunged deep into the animal's shoulder socket. Jack twisted his wrist. The wolf released his arm, howling in pain, and retreated. Jack turned back to Baron. The situation was dire. The alpha had pinned Baron down in the snow. Its jaws were seeking to clamp down on the dog's throat. Baron struggled, its 4 paws clawing at the enemy's belly, but the wolf's weight was overwhelming. Jack didn't think. He threw his entire body, ramming the alpha wolf's flank. The impact made the animal lose its balance and roll away. Baron was freed. Instead of running or retreating to conserve energy, the dog immediately sprang up. It no longer attacked head-on. It skirted to the side, biting hard into the alpha's hind leg. The sound of snapping bone was dry and sharp. Jack stood up, breathing heavily. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Baron. The dog panted furiously, blood from old and new wounds staining the snow at their feet, yet it stood firm. Jack watched how Baron moved. It didn't bite aimlessly. It attacked joints, the neck, and critical weak points. It knew how to coordinate perfectly with him. When he attacked, it flanked. When he was surrounded, it rushed to the rescue. "You're a professional, dog," Jack said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're trained to kill things bigger than you." The alpha struggled to its feet. It limped, its hind leg mangled by Baron's bite. It looked at Jack, then at Baron. In its eyes was no longer the aggression of the predator, but the wariness of the defeated. Jack raised his knife, the blade pointed forward. Baron lowered its head, baring its fangs, ready for round two. But the alpha made its decision. It let out a low growl in its throat, then turned, limping into the darkness. The remaining golden eyes receded and disappeared. The rule of the wild was simple. A predator never gambles its life on prey that is too dangerous. Silence returned to the area. Only the sound of the wind whistled. Jack knelt beside Baron. He took off his gloves, quickly checking the dog's body. A new tear on the shoulder, the old side wound was ripped open, bleeding heavily but not hitting an artery. Jack pulled a roll of gauze and hemostatic powder from his trauma kit. "Sit still," Jack commanded. Baron sat down, tongue lolling out to pant, but its eyes still scanned the surroundings for threats. It allowed Jack to sprinkle the powder onto the wound. Jack wrapped the bandage around the dog's chest, tightening it just enough. "You're a badass warrior, Baron," Jack said, his voice softening, his hand clapping the dog's strong shoulder. "You remind me of my old squad, reckless and stubborn." Baron turned its head and gently licked the blood on Jack's sleeve. It was an affirmation, an unspoken covenant between two soldiers who had just walked through the gates of death together. Jack stood up, sheathed the knife, and retrieved the gun dropped in the snow. He looked ahead. The storm hadn't subsided, and they still hadn't reached their destination. But the initial vague fear was gone. Now, they were the hunters, not the hunted. "We still have a grandmother to save," Jack said. "Get up, rookie." Baron stood up, shaking the snow from its fur. It whimpered slightly in pain, but then stepped forward again, its nose pointing toward the familiar scent. The parachute cord connecting the two then became taut again. Jack followed. The darkness of the old forest seemed to retreat before their presence. Two wounded beings, two survivors, now merged into an unstoppable force. They moved deeper into the night, where a woman's life hung by a thread. The wooden house gradually emerged dimly through the snow, like a shipwreck in a white ocean. It perched precariously on the hillside, surrounded by ancient pine trees. No light spilled from within. Jack stopped, breathing heavily. Steam from his body rose thickly from his collar, condensing into a dense fog in the cold air. Baron stood beside him, trembling all over from exhaustion and blood loss, but its tail remained in a low, alert position. "Check," Jack ordered softly. He scanned the porch. The snow there was, churned up, large footprints, claws dug deep into the wood. Wolf tracks. They had been here. The east window was shattered, shards of glass scattered on the snow, and the wind was blowing straight into the house. Jack untied the parachute cord from Baron. He drew the Glock 19, checking the magazine one last time. 7 rounds left, enough for what was needed. He moved up the steps, avoiding floorboards that might creak. Baron walked close to his heels, silent as a shadow. The front door was stuck. Something was blocking it from the inside. "Sarah, it's Jack. I'm here to help." Jack shouted to announce his presence, preventing the person inside from panicking and attacking. There was no answer, only the sound of the wind whistling through the broken window. Jack didn't hesitate. He stepped back, put his weight into his right shoulder, and rammed the door hard. Wood splintered. The door burst open, pushing back a heavy wooden cabinet that had been used as a barricade. Jack rushed in, gun aimed at the dark corners, clearing the room in 2 seconds with his CQB, close quarters battle, reflex. Secure, he reported to himself. The room was cold as a crypt. Snow and wind from the broken window had coated the floor with a thin white layer. In the farthest corner of the room, sheltered from the wind, a figure was leaning against the wall. It was Sarah. The old woman sat there, her right hand tightly gripping a black iron fireplace poker. The tip of the poker pointed toward the door, trembling but not letting go. Her eyes were wide, open, but their focus had begun to scatter. Her face was deathly pale, her purple lips devoid of color. Mrs. Sarah. Jack lowered his gun and approached. The old woman blinked, trying to recognize the large man in front of her. Emily, she whispered, her voice fragile like the sound of dry leaves crumbling. My granddaughter. She's safe. She's at my place. Warm and safe. Jack said quickly, his voice low and firm to reassure her. He knelt beside her. The situation was worse than he thought. A large pool of blood had congealed under her right foot. Her jean leg was torn, revealing an open fracture. The tibia bone was piercing the skin. The wound was not from a wolf bite, but looked like a severe fall when trying to reinforce the doors. But the cold was the real enemy now. Jack took off his gloves. He placed the back of his hand on her forehead. Ice cold. She was in the stage of moderate to severe hypothermia. Her body had stopped shivering, a dangerous sign that the self-warming mechanism had failed. Baron, come here, Jack commanded. The dog understood immediately. It limped to Sarah's side. Without Jack's guidance, Baron lay down close to the old woman's left flank, curling its large, furry body tightly against her to transfer warmth. Sarah dropped the iron poker. Her icy hand instinctively sought the dog's thick fur, burying her fingers in. In a primal search for life, Jack switched to medic mode. In his mind, the lessons of battlefield first aid were crystal clear. Bleeding, breathing, temperature. He opened his backpack, taking out his individual first aid kit, IFAK. Listen, Sarah, this is going to hurt, but I need you to stay conscious, Jack said. He didn't use falsely gentle words. He needed her to fight with. Him. Jack took out an auto-injector of morphine. He pressed it hard into her uninjured thigh through the fabric of her pants. The dry snap of the spring echoed. Sarah groaned softly, her facial muscles relaxing slightly as the drug took effect. Next was the broken leg. If not immobilized, she would die from pain shock or fat embolism. Jack drew his K-bar knife, cutting her pant leg high up. The wound looked terrible, the flesh around the edges purple with cold. He pulled out a packet of Celox hemostatic powder, tore it open with his teeth, and poured it directly onto the open wound. Sarah flinched, a strangled cry caught in her throat. Baron lifted its head, licked her cheek gently, and whined as if to share the pain. I'm sorry, Jack muttered. He took out 2 flexible SAM splints, bent them to the shape of her leg, then wrapped them tightly with an elastic bandage, immobilizing the knee and ankle. The trauma was dealt with. Now for the temperature. Jack took the silver-coated survival blanket from his backpack, wrapping Sarah completely, covering both her and Baron lying next to her. The combination of the reflective layer and the dog's body heat would create a warm cocoon. But that wasn't enough. The room was wide open. Jack stood up. He looked at the shattered window. The wind was blowing snow in, threatening to extinguish the faint life in the corner of the room. Guard, Jack told Baron, then turned away. He found an old wooden table in the kitchen. Jack flipped it over, stomping his foot. Hard. The table legs broke off. He dragged the tabletop to the window, propping it up to cover the gap. He used scraps of wood and nails found on the windowsill, hammering them in with the spine of his knife to reinforce the tabletop against the frame. The sharp tapping sound echoed, drowning out the howling wind. The room darkened, but the wind stopped blowing in. Jack returned to the fireplace. The ashes were cold. He took out his Zippo lighter and some tinder from a waterproof pouch. The flame flared up, licking at the dry log Sarah had prepared. Yellow-orange light began to dance on the wooden walls, pushing back the darkness and the cold. Jack pulled a military aluminum canteen from his backpack, filled it with clean snow, and placed it on the stove. Hot water was the best restorative medicine right now. When everything was under control, Jack sat down on the floor, leaning against an old armchair facing Sarah and Barron. He placed his gun on his lap, his eyes never leaving the front door. This night was going to be very long. Time passed slowly like solidifying tree sap. Outside, the blizzard seemed to have calmed down slightly, but the wind still whistled through the door cracks like the lament of lost souls. Inside, the crackling of the firewood was the only sound sustaining consciousness. Sarah had fallen asleep due to the effects of the morphine and the return of warmth. Her breathing was steadier, deeper. A faint pink color began to return to her wrinkled cheeks. Barron still lay there, not sleeping. Its golden eyes were wide open in the darkness, reflecting the flickering firelight. Its ears swiveled, catching every minor sound from outside. Occasionally, it would look up at Jack, as if checking if its new teammate was still there. Jack looked at the dog. He saw the old scars crisscrossing its muzzle. The patches of fur turned gray with age, and he saw the white bandage on its side where the bleeding had stopped. An old dog, a wounded dog, a dog left behind by the war, just like him. Jack reached into his inner jacket pocket, touching the old laminated photo. He didn't need to take it out to know the image inside. His wife, Lisa, smiling brightly, holding little Ava. Ava was hugging a teddy bear. For 5 years, Jack had lived in a cocoon of his own. He built the cabin in the woods, not to live, but to wait to die. He punished himself for surviving when they were gone. He refused all connection, all responsibility, believing that anything he touched would shatter. But tonight, he had touched life. He looked at Sarah. He remembered Emily waiting at his cabin. And he looked at Barron. He hadn't shattered them. He had held them together. A strange feeling crept into Jack's chest. It hurt, but it was a comfortable pain, like blood beginning to circulate again in a limb that had been numb for too long. It wasn't joy. It was purpose. Jack realized that the emptiness inside him couldn't be filled by solitude. It could only be filled by action, by standing between the vulnerable and the darkness. "You saved me, Barron," Jack whispered, his voice melting into the quiet space. "I didn't save you. You pulled me out of that hole." Barron gently wagged its tail. Thump, thump. The tail lightly tapped the wooden floor. It understood. Jack took the satellite radio from his backpack. This was his constant companion, an old habit from his SEAL days. He extended the antenna and turned on the power. The static hissed. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Sierra 1, requesting emergency medical evacuation. Coordinates." Jack read the coordinates from his GPS watch. His voice was sharp and professional, with none of the hesitation of the man who had been running from the world for half a decade. The other end was silent for a moment. Then a voice came through, distorted by interference but clear. "Sierra 1, this is Missoula County Search and Rescue. Coordinates received. Weather conditions are improving. ETA is 0600 hours tomorrow morning when the sun rises. Hold your position. Roger. Sierra 1 out." Jack turned off the radio. He leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes, but his hand still gripping the gun. 0600 hours. For more hours. "I'll take this watch," Jack told Barron. "Sleep, soldier." Barron let out a long sigh, rested its chin on Sarah's hand, and closed its eyes. For the first time that night, its muscles completely relaxed. It trusted the man sitting there. Dawn broke with absolute silence. The storm had vanished as if it had never existed, leaving behind a world sculpted by ice and snow. The first rays of sunlight shone through the gaps in the window boards, creating shimmering golden dust motes in the cold air. The sound of a helicopter engine echoed from afar, initially like a mosquito buzzing, then growing into a powerful whoop-whoop sound that shook the wooden floor. Jack stood up, extinguishing the fire. He checked Sarah's leg splint one last time. "The bus is here, Sarah," he said gently. The front door burst open. Wind from the helicopter. Blades swept in, stirring up the fine snow on the porch. A rescue worker wearing goggles and a helmet jumped down from the cable, crouching low as they ran toward the house. Jack helped them transfer Sarah onto the stretcher. Barron followed close beside her, not leaving her side until she was safely in the helicopter bay. The pilot gave Jack a thumbs up, asking if he was getting on. Jack shook his head. He pointed in the direction of his cabin, where Emily was waiting. He signaled that he would travel by ground once the snow had stopped. The helicopter lifted high, banked, and flew toward town. The noise vanished, returning silence to the forest. But this time, the silence was no longer frightening. Jack turned back to look at the empty house. He picked up his backpack, slinging it onto his shoulder. "Let's go get Emily," he said to the air. But when he turned around, Barron was still standing there. The dog hadn't boarded the helicopter. The rescue workers probably hadn't allowed large dogs, or perhaps Barron had chosen to stay. It sat squarely on the porch, its wounds cleanly bandaged by Jack the previous night. Its golden eyes looked straight at Jack, waiting. Jack froze. He looked at the path leading back to his cabin, then at the dog. "You missed your ride," Jack said. Barron tilted its head, its left ear twitching. Jack sighed, a rare smile appearing on his face, easing the strained wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. "All right, I'll point, you rear." Barron stood up, letting out a sharp bark. The two shadows, one man and one dog, began their journey back across the white, sunlit snow. 2 weeks later, Missoula General Hospital. The hospital corridor smelled strongly of disinfectant and fresh flowers. Jack walked slowly, holding a brand-new teddy bear. He stopped in front of room 304. Inside, Emily was sitting on the hospital bed, reading a comic book to Sarah. Sarah's leg was suspended in a sling, encased in a white cast. The color had returned to her face. When Jack walked in, Emily screamed with joy, "Uncle Jack!" The little girl jumped off the bed, rushing into his arms. Jack bent down, catching her with one arm, lifting her into the air. The feeling of holding a child tightened his chest slightly with memory, but the pain was now accompanied by warmth. "I brought you a gift." Jack handed her the teddy bear. "Thank you, Uncle." Emily hugged the bear tightly. "Can I name him Barron?" Jack smiled, "Sure. That's a great name." Sarah looked at him, her old eyes glistening with tears. She grasped Jack's calloused hand. "I don't know how to thank you, Jack. You gave my granddaughter and me a second chance at life. You don't owe me anything." "Sarah," Jack shook his head. "Emily and that four-legged friend are the real heroes." Speaking of him, Sarah hesitated. "The doctor says I need at least 6 months to walk again. And after that, I'll have to move into an assisted living apartment. They don't allow large dogs there. Emily will have to live with her aunt in the city." She looked at Jack, her eyes pleading but full of apprehension. "I know this is a huge favor, but Barron, he needs space. He needs the mountains, and he needs someone who can understand him." Jack was silent. He looked out the hospital window, where the parking lot was bathed in sunlight. "I understand," Jack said simply. Jack walked out of the hospital's automatic doors. The cold winter air hit his face, but the sky was clear and sunny. He walked toward his old Ford F-150 pickup truck parked in the corner of the lot. In the truck bed, a specialized transport crate was open. Sitting next to it, being gently stroked by a young veterinarian, was Barron. The dog had been bathed. Its black and gray fur was sleek and shiny again. The side wound had been stitched up and neatly bandaged. The old worn collar had been replaced with a new, sturdy one. When it saw Jack, Barron instantly stood up. It didn't bark. It just stood there, tail wagging slightly, exuding anticipation. The veterinarian smiled, handing Jack the leash. He wouldn't eat anything this morning. I think he was waiting for his owner. Jack took the leash. He looked into the dog's eyes. "Ready?" Jack asked. Barron licked his hand. Jack opened the passenger door of the pickup truck. He didn't give an order. He patted the worn leather seat. "Get in, Barron." The dog leaped onto the passenger seat, sitting neatly, looking straight through the windshield toward the distant mountains. Jack closed the door, walked around to the driver's seat. He started the engine. The engine roared powerfully. Jack looked over at the seat next to him. Barron turned to look at him, tongue lolling out, a look on its face as if it were smiling. Jack reached into the glove compartment, taking out a pair of sunglasses and putting them on. He looked into the rearview mirror. The image of the lonely man with dark eyes had vanished. "Let's go home," Jack said. The truck pulled out of the parking lot, merging into the bustling traffic. heading toward the vast pine forests. The past was still there, in the rearview mirror, but it was getting smaller and smaller. And ahead, through the windshield, was a wide-open road. Jack Sullivan was no longer alone, and Reaper had died in the blizzard that night. Now, there was only Jack and Baron, two old warriors on a journey to find peace.